2023 was a highly successful year for Donggang Jinhui Food. The seafood processing company based in Dandong, China, opened a large new plant at its compound in this Chinese city that sits along the North Korean border. The company doubled the amount of squid that it exported to the United States. In celebration of its success, Jinhui threw a huge party at its annual meeting, with dancers, fireworks, and a high-tech light show. In a video of that celebration, the company bragged about how it was certified as a good actor by Marine Stewardship Council and other Western auditing firms. The problem, though, is that a crucial reason for Jinhui's success was its widespread use of cheap North Korean labor. Jinhui was part of a much bigger state-run partnership between China and North Korea, where workers are selected by the North Korean government and exported across the border to work in Chinese seafood plants. This is a huge problem because it violates very clear and strict UN sanctions and US law prohibiting the use of North Korean workers in this very fashion. In 2017, after North Korea tested a series of nuclear and ballistic missiles, the United Nations Security Council imposed a series of sanctions. These sanctions made it illegal for foreign companies to use imported North Korean workers on the grounds that their labor was coerced and that their salaries were funding the regime. The UN Security Council, on which China is a member, voted unanimously in favor of these sanctions. Nevertheless, China has consistently violated the sanctions it signed, importing thousands of North Korean workers to seafood plants. And the US and Europe are complicit because they buy huge volumes of seafood coming from these very plants. This year, a team of investigators and I set out to document the use of North Korean labor in China's growing seafood industry. We collected leaked government documents, company promotional materials, satellite imagery, online forums, and local news reports. We reviewed hundreds of cell phone videos shot inside or near the seafood plants that were published on Chinese social media. These materials opened a window onto a hidden world that China has tried to keep secret. In some instances, the presence of North Koreans at Chinese plants was explicitly discussed in the footage or in the comments. We had experts review the footage for North Korean accents, language usage, and other cultural markers. Investigative reporting in China is almost impossible for Western journalists, so we sent Chinese investigators to visit factories, to talk to workers, and to take footage of production lines. What we found is that North Korean workers are tied to much of the seafood consumed in Europe and the US. In particular, we found at least 15 large seafood processing plants in China have used over 1,000 North Korean workers. These plants have shipped more than 120,000 tons of clams, salted pollock fillets, squid, and other seafood to more than 70 importers in the United States since the sanctions went into effect. And those importers ship to many of the biggest grocery stores in the world, including Walmart, ShopRite, and We. They also supply major restaurant chains like McDonald's and Cisco, which is the largest food distributor on the planet, servicing cafeterias in the US Congress, on American military bases, and in public schools. We reached out to these restaurants and grocery stores, but most declined to comment. Typically, such companies rely on social audits to ensure that there is no forced labor at their plants or in their supply chains. But experts, including in the US government, have concluded that these audits are not to be trusted because they don't ask the right questions. And particularly in China, they don't work because of government intimidation and the inability to do unannounced spot checks or to speak openly about human rights or labor concerns. China officially denies that North Korean workers are in the country, and yet the presence of these workers does not go unnoticed by locals. Still, the Chinese government tries hard to conceal its use of North Korean workers. In the weeks after my team's investigators visited several seafood processing plants looking for North Koreans, local Chinese security officials publicly distributed pamphlets with a stern warning. The pamphlets said, quote, "People who make use of the special geographical proximity of the border city to North Korea and the status of a Chinese citizen to contact North Korean workers, or who get too close to the workplaces of North Korean workers, will be treated as engaging in espionage activities endangering national security and be punished severely," end quote. The pamphlets also said that residents working with foreign media would face charges under the Anti-Espionage Act. Jobs in China are highly coveted by North Koreans because they often come with contracts promising a monthly salary of $270 compared to the $3 per month paid for doing similar work in North Korea. However, workers typically see less than 10% of the salary that they're promised. The bulk of their pay is sent to the North Korean government as loyalty payments. After additional deductions for food, water, electricity, heating, and the workers' dormitories, what is left is often less than $30 per month. The North Korean government carefully selects which workers will be sent to factories in Dandong and elsewhere in China. If a worker has a family member who has ever attempted defection, they're automatically disqualified. The process is typically overseen by Room 39, a secretive agency of the North Korean government that oversees activities such as sending assassins abroad, money laundering, weapons purchases, and cyber attacks. Workers often have to sign 2- or 3-year contracts. After they arrive in China, managers confiscate their passports. If workers attempt to escape or complain to people outside the plants, their families at home can face reprisals from the government. The work itself is relentless. Shifts at the seafood plants run 14 to 16 hours. Workers receive up to 1 day off per month, and few, if any, holidays or sick days. In seafood plants, the women sleep in bunk beds in locked dormitories, sometimes with 30 people to a room. Workers are forbidden from tuning in to local TV or radio and from leaving factory grounds unaccompanied. Occasionally, they are allowed to socialize, but almost always within the grounds of the processing plant. In a video posted on social media of North Korean workers playing volleyball, one viewer commented, quote, "They have been brainwashed and they don't know how good the outside world is," end quote. To understand conditions at the plants, I hired investigators to interview women in North Korea who previously worked in seafood processing in China. I wrote a list of questions, and these investigators hand-delivered the questionnaires to the women. After these workers wrote their replies, the investigators took pictures of their answers and sent them to me electronically. Most of these workers are women, and their responses to me were stark. They described loneliness, violence, and a crushing sense of captivity. They also described a widespread pattern of sexual abuse. Among the 20 female North Korean seafood workers interviewed, all but 3 said they had faced sexual assault. During the pandemic, China closed its borders, and many North Korean workers found themselves trapped far away from home. Often their workplaces shut down, their incomes lost. North Korean workers often have to take loans from loan sharks to pay bribes to government officials and labor brokers to secure a job in China. When workers were unable to pay back those loans, North Korean loan sharks sent groups of local thugs to the homes of workers' relatives to intimidate them. The pressure of debt, sexual violence, and loneliness led some of these workers to take drastic measures. For example, in 2023, 2 North Korean women at textile plants committed suicide. Pandemic restrictions in China were eased in late 2023. The Sino-Korean Friendship Bridge that links Dandong to the North Korean city of Shinwiju reopened, and many workers were allowed to go home. When the workers return to North Korea, they are interrogated on every aspect of how they spent each day, who they worked with, and the behavior of their fellow workers. In the letters the North Korean women wrote to me, they said they were glad to have made money, but they were haunted by the experience, especially the sexual abuse. In the start of 2024, the Chinese and North Korean governments began negotiations about the next wave of workers to be dispatched to Chinese seafood factories. Sources told me the price for each worker had gone up. North Korean labor brokers planned to add an extra $130 fee per worker. Why? Because this is a market, supply and demand, and it turns out the Chinese seafood industry is heavily dependent on cheap North Korean labor for its growing global production. And in particular, to feed consumers, not just in Asia, but also in the US and Europe.